Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So you think you know history, right? You remember the dates, the big battles, the famous kings and queens. But what about the stuff they didn't teach you in school? The stories that are so bizarre, so out there, you'd think someone made them up. Well, get ready, because today, we're diving deep into the historical deep cuts. I'm talking about 10 weird historical events you never learned in school. These are the tales that are too strange for the textbooks, too wild for the classroom, but absolutely true. History isn't just a bunch of dusty old facts and figures. It's a collection of human stories. And let me tell you, humans are weird. We've done some truly baffling things over the centuries. From declaring war on birds to putting a dead body on trial. Yes, you heard that right. The past is packed with moments that will make you scratch your head and say, wait, that actually happened? It's like finding out your super serious grandpa was once in a boy band. It just changes how you see everything. So buckle up. We're about to go on a journey through time to uncover some of the strangest, funniest, and most unbelievable events that have been left out of your history books. These stories prove that the past is way more entertaining and surprising than you ever imagined. We've got plagues that make you dance, floods of beer, and wars started over soccer games. You're not going to want to miss this. Let's get into it. Alright, first up, let's head to Strasbourg, France in the year 1518. It's a hot summer and things are about to get groovy. It all started with one woman, a Frau Trophäa. One day, she just walks out into the street and starts dancing. No music, no party, just dancing. And she doesn't stop, she dances for hours, then for days. You'd think someone would say, hey Frau T, maybe take a 5, but no. Her neighbors probably thought it was a bit odd at first. You know, you look out your window, oh, there's Frau Trophäa again, still doing that weird jig. But then, something even stranger happened. Other people started joining in. First one neighbor, then another, then a whole group. Within a week, there were over 30 people dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg. It was like the world's first and most terrifying flash mob. The local authorities were completely baffled. What do? They brought in doctors who, using the best science of the day, diagnosed the problem as hot blood. Their prescription? More dancing. Seriously, they figured the dancers just needed to get it out of their system. So they cleared out guild halls, built a stage, and even hired musicians to keep the beat going. They thought a non-stop rave would cure them. You can probably guess this was a terrible, terrible idea. The music and the dedicated dancing space only seemed to encourage more people to join. The crowd of dancers swelled from dozens to over 400 people. They danced day and night, without rest, without stopping to eat or drink. Their feet were bloody, they were exhausted, but they just couldn't stop moving to a beat that only they could hear. It was a full-blown epidemic of dancing. The scene must have been horrifying. Imagine hundreds of people, their faces twisted in pain and exhaustion, their bodies jerking and twirling uncontrollably. It wasn't joyful dancing, it was a torturous, relentless marathon. People were literally dancing themselves to death. Reports from the time say that dozens died from heart attacks, strokes, and pure exhaustion. They just collapsed in the middle of their frantic movements. Eventually the dancing mania just faded away. After about a month, the dancers started to slow down and stop one by one, until the streets were finally still again. To this day, no one knows for sure what caused it. Theories range from mass hysteria and psychological stress to a fungus on rye bread that has psychedelic properties. Whatever it was, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of history's most bizarre and deadly parties. Okay, next up we're heading down under to Australia in 1932 for a conflict that sounds like a cartoon plot. It's called the Great Emu War. And yes, it was a war against emus. And yes, the emus won. I'm not making this up. After World War I, the Australian government gave land to ex-soldiers to become farmers. The problem was, this land was also prime real estate for about 20,000 emus. These weren't just any birds. Emus are huge, they're fast, and they were hungry. They descended upon the farmlands of Western Australia like a feathered plague, trampling fences and devouring entire crops of wheat. The farmers, many of them veterans, were desperate. They went to the government for help, and the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, had a brilliant idea. Or so he thought. His plan? Deploy the military. He sent a major, a sergeant, and 2 soldiers armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They were going to war, against birds. The media got wind of it and was super excited. A cinematographer even came along to film the glorious victory. The soldiers probably thought it would be easy, right? Like shooting fish in a barrel. or, birds in a field. They were wrong, so wrong. The first attempt was a total disaster. The soldiers spotted a flock of about 50 emus and opened fire. But emus are smart. As soon as the bullets started flying, the flock scattered in all directions, running erratically. The soldiers burned through a ton of ammo and managed to kill maybe a dozen birds. The emus were faster and more tactically brilliant than anyone anticipated. One soldier apparently said the emus had the resilience of tanks. He said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." The emus used guerrilla tactics. One large group would have a leader who would keep watch, and at the first sign of danger, he'd give a signal and they'd all scatter. They were outsmarting the Australian army. After several embarrassing failures and a lot of wasted ammunition, the military withdrew. The emus had won the first battle. They tried again a few weeks later with slightly more success, but the kill rate was still abysmal. It was a PR nightmare. The press had a field day mocking the whole operation. Eventually the government just gave up. The Great Emu War was over. The emus had successfully defended their territory and the farmers were left to build stronger fences. A true underdog story. Get ready because this next one is probably the weirdest thing a pope has ever done. And that's saying something. We're going to Rome in the year 897 AD for an event called the Cadaver Synod. A synod is like a church council meeting, but this one had a special guest, a corpse. A dead pope was put on trial by the new pope. It's a whole new level of petty. Here's the backstory. We have two popes, Pope Formosus, who died, and Pope Stephen VI, who really hated him. There was a lot of political drama and backstabbing in the Vatican at the time, and Stephen felt that Formosus had wronged him and his political allies. So when Stephen became pope, he decided to get his revenge. But how do you get revenge on a guy who's already dead? Pope Stephen's solution was simple and completely insane. He ordered that the body of Pope Formosus be exhumed from its tomb. Formosus had been dead for 9 months, so you can imagine the state he was in. They dug him up, dressed him in his full papal robes and propped him up on a throne in the courtroom to face trial. This is real. A decomposing corpse was the defendant in a papal court. The trial began. Pope Stephen VI acted as the prosecutor, screaming accusations at the corpse of Formosus. He accused him of perjury, of illegally becoming pope, all sorts of things. Of course, Formosus didn't offer much of a defense for obvious reasons. A young deacon was appointed to stand behind the corpse and speak on its behalf, but it was a sham. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Unsurprisingly, the dead Pope Formosus was found guilty. As punishment, all of his acts and ordinations as pope were declared null and void. Then they took his body, stripped it of the papal vestments, and cut off the 3 fingers on his right hand, the fingers he used for blessings. It was a symbolic and gruesome act of desecration, meant to erase him from history. But the story doesn't end there. After the mutilation, they dragged his body through the streets of Rome and threw it into the Tiber River. The whole event was so shocking and grotesque that it turned public opinion against Pope Stephen. A massive earthquake hit Rome shortly after, which people took as a sign of God's displeasure. A few months later, an angry mob seized Pope Stephen, threw him in prison, and had him strangled. Talk about karma. Okay, let's talk about a very specific, very weird political tradition from the city of Prague. It's called defenestration. It's a fancy word that means the act of throwing someone out of a window. And in Prague, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It happened so often they had to number them. We're going to talk about the 2 most famous ones. It seems when politicians in Prague had a disagreement, the solution was, let's just toss them out the window. The first defenestration of Prague happened way back in 1419. Tensions were high between the followers of a religious reformer named Jan Hus and the Catholic City Council. A group of Hussites led by a priest marched to the new town hall to demand the release of some of their imprisoned comrades. They were angry, they had a crowd, and they meant business. When they got to the town hall, the negotiations did not go well. The city councilors, looking down from the window, were defiant. At one point, someone from inside the town hall allegedly threw a rock at the crowd, hitting their sacred monstrance. This was the last straw. The enraged crowd stormed the building, found the councilors and the judge and, well, you know what's coming. They threw them out of the window. The fall was pretty high, and the councilors who weren't killed instantly were finished off by the angry mob waiting below. This violent act kicked off the Hussite Wars, a conflict that lasted for nearly 2 decades. So, yeah, throwing people out of a window can have some pretty serious consequences. You'd think they would have learned their lesson about settling disputes this way. But nope, fast forward to 1618. It's time for the Second Defenestration of Prague. Again, it's a religious and political dispute, this time between Protestant nobles and the Catholic representatives of the Holy Roman Emperor. The Protestants were upset that their religious freedoms were being violated, so a group of them went to Prague Castle to confront two of the emperor's governors and their secretary. After a heated argument in a council room, the Protestants grabbed the two governors and their scribe and, you guessed it, chucked them out the third-story window. It was a drop of about 70 feet. But here's the crazy part. They all survived. Catholic legend says they were saved by angels who gently lowered them to the ground. The more likely, and less miraculous explanation is that they landed in a giant pile of manure and garbage that had accumulated in the castle moat. Either way, this event was the spark that ignited the 30 Years' War, one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. Have you ever had one of those dreams where your house is flooded with your favorite drink? Well, for the people of St. Giles, London in 1814, that dream became a very real and very deadly nightmare. Except the drink was beer. A literal tidal wave of beer. This is the story of the Great London Beer Flood. It's a tragedy, but also, a beer flood. The source of this boozy disaster was Moo & Company's Horseshoe Brewery on Tottenham Court Road. This was a massive operation for its time. They had these gigantic wooden vats for fermenting porter, a popular dark beer. One of these vats was truly enormous, standing over 22 feet tall and holding the equivalent of more than 3,500 barrels of beer. That's over 1.2 million pints. On October 17, 1814, an iron ring that held the massive vat together suddenly snapped. The brewery workers knew this was bad, but they probably didn't grasp just bad. The pressure from the fermenting beer inside was immense. The vat exploded with the force of a cannon, sending its contents rushing out. This initial blast caused a domino effect, smashing open several other large casks in the brewery. Suddenly, a wave of hot fermenting beer, estimated to be over 320,000 imperial gallons, burst out of the brewery and into the surrounding streets. This wasn't a gentle trickle, it was a 15-foot-high tsunami of dark, sticky porter. It crashed through the narrow streets and alleys of the St. Giles Rookery, which was a poor, densely populated slum area right next to the brewery. The force of the wave was devastating. It smashed through the walls of flimsy tenement houses, flooding basements where entire families lived. People were caught completely off guard, swept away by the current or trapped in the wreckage. In one house, a mother and her young daughter who were having tea were killed instantly when the wave collapsed their home. In the end, 8 people died in the London beer flood, most of them women and children. 7 drowned in the beer, and 1 died later from alcohol poisoning. There were even ghoulish reports of people scooping up the beer from the gutters in pots and pans. The brewery was taken to court, but the disaster was ruled an act of God, so no one was held responsible. They even got a tax break to cover the cost of the lost beer, a truly bizarre and tragic chapter in London's history. We all know sports rivalries can get intense, emotions run high, fans get crazy. But have you ever heard of a rivalry that led to an actual war? Not a war of words, but a real war with tanks, planes, and soldiers. Well, in 1969, that's exactly what happened between two neighboring countries, El Salvador and Honduras. And it all got kicked off by a soccer match, or as the rest of the world calls it, a football match. Now, to be fair, the soccer game wasn't the reason for the war. There were some serious underlying tensions. For decades, thousands of Salvadorans had migrated to Honduras in search of land and work, which caused a lot of resentment and political friction over land reform and immigration. The situation was a powder keg, and the soccer games were the match that lit the fuse. The two countries were playing a 3-game playoff series to qualify for the 1970 FIFA World Cup. The atmosphere was incredibly hostile from the start. For the first game in the Honduran capital, the Salvadoran team was harassed all night at their hotel, with fans making noise so they couldn't sleep. Honduras won that game 1-0. The second game in San Salvador was even worse. The Honduran team's bus was attacked, their flag was burned, and they received death threats. El Salvador won that game 3-0. The tension was off the charts. Riots broke out, and there were violent attacks against immigrant communities in both countries. Newspapers in both nations fanned the flames with nationalist propaganda. After the second game, the border between the two countries was closed. The decisive third match was held on neutral ground in Mexico City. El Salvador won 3-2 in extra time, securing their spot in the World Cup. But the celebration was short-lived. Just a couple of weeks after that final game, on July 14, 1969, the Salvadoran military launched an invasion of Honduras. The conflict that followed is now known as the Football War, or the 100-Hour War. It was a short but brutal conflict. Both sides used their air forces to bomb strategic targets, and there was fierce fighting on the ground. After 4 days of fighting, a ceasefire was negotiated by the Organization of American States. The war was over, but the consequences were devastating. An estimated 3,000 people, mostly civilians, were killed. Tens of thousands of Salvadorans were displaced or expelled from Honduras, creating a refugee crisis. And the two countries' economies were shattered. All this, ignited by the passion and politics surrounding a simple game of soccer. Okay, we've had a flood of beer, now get ready for a flood of molasses. Yes, the sweet, sticky stuff you put in gingerbread. In 1919, the city of Boston experienced one of the strangest and most destructive disasters in its history, the Great Molasses Flood. And let me tell you, as weird as it sounds, it was no joke. This was a deadly, sticky tsunami. The disaster started with a massive steel tank in Boston's North End neighborhood. This tank was about 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, and it belonged to the Purity Distilling Company. They used all that molasses to produce industrial alcohol for munitions. Since this was right after World War I, the tank could hold over 2.3 million gallons of the thick, gooey syrup. Locals knew there was something off with the tank. It groaned and shuddered when it was filled, and brown, sticky molasses was always leaking out of the seams. Kids would even bring cups to collect the sweet drips. The company, well, they knew about the leaks but just painted the tank brown to hide them. On January 15, 1919, a day that was unseasonably warm, the tank was nearly full from a recent shipment of molasses from the Caribbean. Around lunchtime, with a sound like a machine gun, the rivets on the tank popped. The steel walls ripped apart, and a colossal wave of molasses, estimated to be 25 feet high at its peak, erupted from the tank. It moved at an incredible 35 miles per hour, way faster than anyone could run. The wave was so powerful, it ripped a fire station from its foundation and even knocked an elevated train track off its supports. It was a scene of absolute chaos and horror. The thick brown wave crushed everything in its path, buildings, wagons, horses, and people. It was like being hit by a sticky locomotive. But the real danger wasn't just the initial impact, it was the aftermath. The molasses was so thick and viscous that people and animals who got caught in it became trapped, almost like being stuck in quicksand. Rescue efforts were incredibly tough, with workers slogging through waist-deep goo. In the end, 21 people were killed and over 150 were injured. The cleanup took weeks. The harbor was brown with molasses for months, and residents claimed that on hot summer days for decades afterward, you could still smell the sweet scent of molasses in the North End. This disaster led to new laws and regulations for construction and engineering standards in Massachusetts, making sure that a tragedy like this would never happen again. This next story is proof that sometimes international incidents can start over the smallest things. In this case, it was a tree. A single poplar tree in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, the tense border between North and South Korea. This is the story of Operation Paul Bunyan, the most expensive tree trimming exercise in history. The year is 1976. The DMZ is supposed to be a neutral buffer zone, but it's one of the most heavily armed borders in the world. In the middle of it, near the Bridge of No Return, stood a 40-foot poplar tree. During the summer, its leaves blocked the view between a United Nations command checkpoint and an observation post. This was a security problem. The UN forces needed a clear line of sight. So, a simple solution was decided: trim the tree. A group of American and South Korean soldiers, escorted by security, went into the joint security area with axes to do some routine pruning. This was not supposed to be a big deal. They had even notified the North Koreans beforehand, as was standard procedure. But the North Koreans were not happy about it. A group of North Korean soldiers showed up, led by a particularly aggressive officer, and told the work party to stop. The American officer in charge, Captain Arthur Boniface, told them to ignore it and keep working. The situation escalated quickly. The North Korean officer shouted, "Kill the bastards!" and his soldiers attacked the unarmed work party with the axes and crowbars the tree trimmers had brought with them. The attack was brutal and swift. Captain Boniface and another American officer, Lieutenant Mark Barrett, were killed in the chaos. Several South Korean and American soldiers were wounded. The incident, which became known as the Axe Murder Incident, shocked the world and brought the Korean peninsula to the brink of war. The United States could not let this act of aggression stand. President Gerald Ford and his advisors, including Henry Kissinger, decided they needed to respond with a massive show of force. But they also needed to finish the original mission, cutting down that tree. The result was Operation Paul Bunyan. 3 days after the attack, a huge force of American and South Korean soldiers, engineers with chainsaws, and martial arts-trained special forces rolled into the DMZ. The operation was backed by B-52 bombers, fighter jets, helicopter gunships, and even an aircraft carrier battle group offshore. It was an overwhelming display of military might, all to cut down one poplar tree. The North Koreans watched, but did nothing. The tree came down in 42 minutes, and a major war was averted. Okay, let's lighten the mood a little bit with a story that you probably benefit from every single morning. This is the story of how we discovered coffee. And it all starts not with a scientist or an explorer, but with a flock of dancing goats. Yes, the most popular beverage in the world might owe its existence to some very energetic goats in ancient Ethiopia. The legend takes us back to sometime around the 9th century. There was a goat herder named Kaldi. He was just a regular guy taking his goats out to pasture in the Ethiopian highlands. One day he noticed something strange. His goats, which were usually pretty chill, were acting weird. They were jumping, dancing, and bleating excitedly. They had way more energy than usual and didn't want to sleep at night. Kaldi was totally confused. What was wrong with his goats? He decided to investigate. He watched them closely and saw that they were all munching on the bright red berries of a particular shrub he'd never paid much attention to before. Curious, and probably a little brave, Kaldi decided to try the berries himself. He picked a few, popped them in his mouth and chewed. And, wow! He felt a sudden rush of energy and alertness. He felt invigorated, wide awake. He was so excited about his discovery that he joined his goats in their dancing. He had found the secret to their mysterious energy boost. This was too good to keep to himself. He had to share this magical discovery with someone. So, Kaldi gathered some of the berries and ran to a nearby monastery to tell the abbot, the head monk, all about them. The abbot, however, was not impressed. He thought the berries were the work of the devil, and promptly threw them into a fire, calling them sinful. But as the berries roasted in the flames, they began to release an incredible aroma. The smell was so rich and enticing that other monks came over to see what was happening. Intrigued by the amazing smell, the monks raked the roasted beans from the fire, crushed them, and put them in hot water to preserve them. They decided to try the brew, and just like Kaldi, they found that it kept them awake and alert. This was perfect for their long, late-night prayer sessions. From that monastery, the knowledge of this amazing new drink began to spread, first across the Arabian Peninsula and then eventually to the entire world. And it's all thanks to Kaldi and his dancing goats. And for our grand finale, we have a story that is so unbelievably absurd, it has become a legend of the internet age. But it is 100% real, and there's video to prove it. We're going to the coast of Oregon in 1970 for the infamous exploding whale incident. This is what happens when a good idea goes very, very wrong. In November 1970, a massive 45-foot, 8-ton sperm whale washed up on the beach near Florence, Oregon. This presented a problem for the local authorities. What do you do with a giant, decaying whale carcass? It was too big to bury, too big to move. The smell was getting worse by the day. The Oregon Highway Division was put in charge, and an engineer named George Thornton had a brilliant explosive idea. His plan? Dynamite. He figured that if they used enough dynamite, they could blow the whale into tiny, bite-sized pieces. Then the seagulls and other scavengers would just clean up the mess. It would be a natural, efficient disposal. What could possibly go wrong? He consulted with the military, calculated the amount of dynamite needed, and settled on a half-ton of it. 20 cases of pure explosive power. A local news crew, led by reporter Paul Lindman, showed up to film the historic event. A crowd of spectators gathered at what they thought was a safe distance. Lindman's news report from that day is iconic. He describes the plan with total seriousness. He says, "The hope is that the long-awaited blast will disintegrate the whale, so the seagulls and other scavengers can clean up the remains." Then came the moment of truth. The dynamite was detonated. There was a massive explosion. But the whale did not, I repeat, did not disintegrate into tiny, seagull-friendly bits. Instead, the blast sent massive bus-sized chunks of blubber flying through the air. The crowd of spectators screamed and ran for cover as giant stinking pieces of whale rained down from the sky. One huge chunk of blubber flew a quarter of a mile and completely crushed the roof of a brand new car that a bystander had just bought. The news crew was covered in a fine mist of blood and blubber. It was a complete and utter disaster. The seagulls, by the way, who were supposed to be the cleanup crew, they were scared off by the explosion and didn't come back. In the end, highway crews had to clean up the giant, unexploded chunks of whale by hand. The small pieces were still all over the beach. It remains one of the greatest cautionary tales in public works history. And there you have it. 10 of the most bizarre, unbelievable, and downright weird historical events they definitely left out of your textbook. From dancing plagues and beer floods to wars against emus and exploding whales, it just goes to show that the past is full of surprises. History is so much more than just dates and names. It's a collection of incredible human stories, and sometimes those stories are completely bonkers. I hope this look at the stranger side of history made you laugh and maybe made you see the past in a whole new, weirder light. These are just a few of my favorites, but I know there are countless other strange tales out there. History is a massive, weird, and wonderful subject, and we've only just scratched the surface, so now I want to hear from you. What's the weirdest historical event you've ever heard of? Maybe it's a local legend from your hometown or another crazy story you stumbled upon. Let me know down in the comments below. I can't wait to read what you all come up with and maybe learn something new myself. If you enjoyed this trip through the strange side of history and want to see more videos uncovering the stories you missed in school, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.